Hello everyone, my name is Laura Diaconu Maxim, and today I'm going to present you a paper that I have written with my colleague Professor Cristian Popescu, entitled Tertiary Education during COVID-19 Pandemic. The main aspects included in this paper are related to a brief introduction about the global COVID-19 pandemic. Afterwards, we focused on the socioeconomic impact of this pandemic, then on the impact on higher education from students' perspective and also from an institutional perspective, and of course in the end some final remarks. General aspects regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, we can say that timing, intensity, and the spread of this pandemic varied among states. Of course, it was noticed that the states that implemented earlier some measures, such as Australia, Norway, or Denmark, had positive results, while those that implemented later, such as US or UK, are still confronting with serious problems. However, the precise impact is not clear because statistics are only partially reliable and not very comparable. Now some worrying aspects are related to the fact that the second wave is about to start. Some analysts say that it has already started, the second wave, and this raises the question about new lockdowns, regional or even national lockdowns. Moreover, a third wave is expected. Meanwhile, new mutations may increase the infectiousness and mortality of this virus, and one of the most worrying aspects is also the fact that immunity after this infection seems to be limited. Regarding the socioeconomic impact, the global impact of this pandemic, considering the fact that there were several measures already been implemented and maybe there are going to be more measures to be implemented, it is estimated the impact will be higher than in the case of 2008 crisis. Which will raise a real risk of global recession. During the first lockdown, it was noticed that the worst affected was the service sector, and it is still the worst affected. Meanwhile, globalization also faces some challenges in terms of production, supply chains, trade, and tourism. The nationalist or protectionist tendencies with long-lasting effects have also occurred. Meanwhile, the rise of China in the global arena gets an important setback. Unemployment during this pandemic was a major issue, a socio and also economic issue. It had negative impact on well-being by raising the poverty and inequality, and also by raising some serious physical and mental health issues. It increased the household stress and consequently the violence and so on. So considering all the consequences, negative consequences that this pandemic had, it naturally occurs the question, how fast will the global economy recover, if it recovers? Regarding the impact on higher education, it was noticed that more than 20,000 higher education institutions were closed down. So, of course, the learning opportunities were affected. Meanwhile, it was a switch to online learning or mixed modes educational delivery. The pandemic had an indirect impact on universities' budget, especially in the case of the institutions dependent on fee-paying students. So, on short and medium term, the very likely measures to be implemented are laying off staff on temporary contracts. However, it is estimated a fact that the overall student enrollment will increase. Like in any crisis, enrollment in universities is a better option than being unemployed. And this is a fact known by everyone. From students' perspective, they say that admission procedures were seriously disrupted. The fact that there were some restrictions or more restrictions on traveling regarding immigration, visa, and so on, it was a reduced students' mobility. It was noticed that in this context, the Asian students looked for regional alternatives to US or European studies, and also the intra-European mobility was affected. Of course, the pandemic had a negative impact on equity. Disadvantaged students were particularly hit. There were disruptions in assessments and evaluations, and moreover, students from the end of the undergraduate or master programs were not able to complete their school curriculum and assessment in a face-to-face manner as their colleagues from previous generations did. So that had a strong psychological impact. Studying at home was a difficult task, especially for pupils with low motivation. So we noticed a school abandon which was higher than in a similar period in previous years. A study conducted between March and April 2020 on 424 students showed that some students were victims of racism. Of course, racism is unjustifiable and unacceptable, so urgent measures are required from institutions. Meanwhile, the pandemic led to mental health issues such as anxiety and isolation. From an institutional perspective, we see that enrollment of international students in university will be the most affected. On continents, we see that Europe is the region where government or Ministry of Education is going to support universities in the largest proportion, while Africa is the region where the government and the Ministry of Education is able to support the universities in the lowest percentage. Those higher education institutions that were not affected by the pandemic were, of course, the virtual universities. We can see here from this figure that in a study conducted by International Association of Universities, almost 2/3 of universities were able to move teaching online. So most of them, of course, were located in Europe, followed by Asia and Pacific, then Americas, and in the end in Africa. It's not surprising, actually, this statistic. It is very likely that hybrid teaching, meaning online and face-to-face, and blended education, online content plus rotation system for on-site activities, is going to take place until mid of 2021. Of course, there will be differences among education provided by teachers with high digital skills and those lacking training or adaptability. Yet, the good side of this pandemic is the fact that new teaching methods will arise. What is coming next? Well, we can say that the impact of the current digitalization of higher education on the quality of teaching and learning is to be seen in future. However, the pandemic will reinforce hierarchies in the global higher education landscape, meaning that institutions with large endowments will be more resilient. It is very necessary that universities and students to collaborate closely so they could find solutions to provide the current and next generations of students the same, if not better, learning opportunities than the pre-COVID-19 generations had. At the national level, it is important to be implemented several strategies. First of all, to include higher education in stimulus plans for economic and social recovery, to forge a national consensus for a strategy for fostering recovery and innovation in higher education, to provide a clear regulatory environment for the reopening classrooms that promotes a sense of security, and to promote international cooperation. Thank you very much for your attention.